The locker room smelled of sweat, jet fuel, and something sharper, the particular blend of cologne and contempt that clung to men who'd never expected her here. Lieutenant Commander Nadia Ghost, Volkov stood motionless before her open locker, staring at the uniform draped across the bench. Not her uniform. Commander Harrison's dress whites, perfectly pressed, adorned with ribbons she'd never earned, placed deliberately where her flight suit should have been. The laughter behind her wasn't subtle. It rolled through the ready room like turbulence, shaking the fluorescent-lit space with a violence that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with power. She'd been warned about this. 3 deployments, 200 carrier landings, and a distinguished flying cross hadn't changed the fundamental equation. She was an outsider in a world built by men who measured worth in decibels and dominance. The uniform wasn't just a prank. It was a test, maybe even a trap. If she reacted, she'd be emotional, unstable, proof of everything they whispered when she walked past. If she ignored it, she'd be weak, someone who could be pushed until she broke or quit. Nadia's fingers brushed the sleeve of Harrison's jacket, feeling the cold weight of the shoulder boards, the 4 gold stripes that represented a rank she'd probably never reach, not because she couldn't fly, but because she refused to play the game the way they wanted. "Looking good, Ghost," someone called from behind her. Lieutenant Jake "Viper" Morrison, probably, though she didn't turn to check. "Maybe if you wear the commander's uniform long enough, you'll figure out how to actually lead a formation without pissing yourself." More laughter. She could map their positions by sound alone. Morrison near the door, Lieutenant Chen by the coffee station, 3 or 4 others scattered throughout the space like landmines waiting for pressure. This wasn't random. This was coordinated, a carefully orchestrated message delivered the morning of the biggest mission brief of the deployment. In 6 hours, she'd be leading a strike package into contested airspace over the Kalvek Strait, where radar signatures bloomed like flowers and surface-to-air missiles wrote poetry in trails of smoke. In 6 hours, these same men would be flying her wing, trusting her decisions with their lives even as they mocked her existence. Nadia lifted the uniform carefully, folding it with the same precision she used for pre-flight checks. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than the ventilation system overhead. Someone should return this to Commander Harrison. Hate for him to think it went missing. She placed the folded whites on top of her locker and reached for her flight suit, pulling the Nomex fabric over her shoulders like armor. The laughter didn't stop immediately, but it changed texture, becoming uncertain, a frequency that wavered between amusement and something else. Nadia zipped the suit to her throat, attached her name tape, her squadron patch, the Black Aces, VFA 41, a unit with more combat history than most countries. Her call sign stared back at her from the Velcro strip. Ghost. They'd given it to her as an insult during flight school, suggesting she was invisible, forgettable, a presence so negligible she barely registered. She'd kept it because invisibility, she'd learned, was a kind of power. Ghosts moved through walls. Ghosts saw everything. Ghosts didn't need permission to haunt the spaces where they didn't belong. She closed her locker with a metallic snap that silenced the room more effectively than any shout. "Briefs in 30, she said to no one in particular. "If anyone needs extra time studying the mission parameters, now would be good. Target package is complex, and I'd hate to lose anyone because they didn't know which radar site to suppress first." The words hung in the air like ordnance, precisely delivered, impossible to ignore. Morrison stepped forward, his 6'3" frame blocking the light from the overhead panels. "You know what your problem is, Ghost." His voice carried the lazy confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been doubted, never had to prove anything beyond his ability to look the part. "You think flying makes you one of us. But see, there's flying and then there's belonging. You can pull all the GS you want, stick all the landings, but you'll never." "Lieutenant Morrison." The voice came from the doorway, sharp as a catapult launch. Commander Harrison filled the frame, his face unreadable, his uniform, the real one, immaculate. "My office. Now." The room froze. Morrison's confidence evaporated like fuel in a hot gun bay. his face cycling through surprise, calculation, and finally resignation. He moved toward the door, shoulders tight, while Harrison's gaze swept the space, cataloging every face, every frozen expression, building a ledger Nadia knew he'd balance later. His eyes found hers for half a second, and something passed between them that wasn't quite approval, wasn't quite sympathy, but was definitely recognition. Then he was gone, Morrison trailing behind him like debris in a slipstream. The silence that followed was different from the laughter, heavier, charged with possibilities that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Nadia finished her prep routine. Check zippers, verify patches, confirm her helmet bag contained everything she'd need for the 9-hour mission ahead. Her squadron mates watched her with new attention, the kind of focus that emerged when something familiar suddenly revealed itself as unknown territory. She'd been flying with them for 3 months, eating with them, sitting through endless briefs about rules of engagement and airspace restrictions, but this was the first time they'd actually seen her. Really seen her. The ghost had materialized, and now they couldn't look away. "Strike briefs in the intel center," she said, slinging her helmet bag over her shoulder. "I'll be reviewing the SAM threat rings if anyone wants to discuss tactics before the official brief." She walked past them without waiting for responses, her boots making even sounds against the deck plating, each step a declaration that she wasn't leaving, wasn't breaking, wasn't going to make this easy for anyone who thought she didn't belong here. The passageway outside the ready room stretched forward like a runway, lined with frames containing photos of previous squadron commanders, generations of pilots who'd worn the same patch, flown the same missions, built the reputation she now carried. Not one of them looked like her. Not one of them had her last name, her accent, her particular history of proving herself in spaces designed to reject her. But every single one had faced moments like this, moments when the mission mattered more than pride, when leadership meant walking forward even when the laughter followed like wake turbulence. The Intel Center occupied a secure space deep in the carrier's hull, insulated from the flight deck chaos by layers of steel and classification. Nadia badged through 3 checkpoints, descended 2 ladders, and finally entered the windowless room where maps glowed on screens and threat overlays painted the Kalvik Strait in shades of red and amber. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the Air Wing's intelligence officer, no relation to the coffee station Chen, looked up from her workstation with an expression Nadia had learned to read like instruments. Concern mixed with respect, the face of someone who knew what was coming. "They hit you with the uniform thing?" Chen asked without preamble. She was one of 3 women in the Air Wing, and though she didn't fly, she understood the particular mathematics of existing in spaces that calculated your worth differently. "Harrison's dress whites," Nadia confirmed, settling into a chair before a digital map that showed their planned ingress route, a low-level approach threading between 2 mountain ranges, designed to mask them from coastal radar sites until the last possible moment. "Creative, I'll give them that." "Creative," Chen's voice was flat. "That's one word for it, you report it." Harrison saw. He handled it. Nadia traced the route with one finger, calculating times and distances, fuel burns and weapons release parameters. The mission was a knife fight disguised as a strike package. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets loaded with anti-radiation missiles and precision-guided bombs, tasked with destroying a radar complex that had been guiding missile strikes against civilian shipping. Intelligence suggested the complex was protected by an S-400 system, one of the most sophisticated air defense networks ever deployed, capable of tracking and engaging targets at ranges that made traditional suppression tactics suicidal. "And you're still leading the package?" Chen asked, though she already knew the answer, "after they made it clear what they think of you." Nadia looked up from the map, meeting Chen's eyes directly. "Especially after that. They need to see what I can do when everything's on the line. They need to understand that Ghost isn't just a call sign, it's a promise. I get in, I complete the mission, I get out, and I bring everyone home." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Besides Morrison's flying my wing, If I scrub or show weakness now, he'll never let anyone forget it. This is about more than one mission. It's about every mission after this. Chen nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what wasn't being said. Every decision Nadia made would be judged against a standard that didn't apply to Morrison or the others. A mistake they'd call bad luck, she'd wear as proof of incompetence. A success they'd attribute to fortune, she'd have to repeat twice more before anyone acknowledged skill. This was the algebra of being first, of being different, of carrying expectations that bent under their own mass. The strike brief started exactly on time, with Captain Rodriguez, the Air Wing commander, standing before a screen that displayed their objective in high-resolution detail. The Kalvik radar station perched on a coastal cliff, its arrays visible as geometric patterns that could paint aircraft at 200 miles, guide missiles with precision measured in meters. Rodriguez spoke with the economy of someone who'd flown combat missions before most of the pilots in the room had been born, his weathered face betraying nothing as he outlined the threat. Overlapping air defense zones, patrol boats in the strait, mountain terrain that turned navigation into a chess match against physics. Ghost will lead the package, Rodriguez announced, and Nadia felt the room's attention shift toward her like a targeting laser. Her tactical assessment of the threat rings gave us the ingress route we're using. She'll coordinate the defense suppression while Viper's element delivers the primary ordnance. He clicked to the next slide, showing the timeline. Launch at 400, ingress through darkness, weapons release at dawn when the light would paint them against the sky for exactly 90 seconds before they turned for home. Morrison raised his hand, his voice carefully neutral. Sir, question about the suppress and strike timing. If Ghost's element takes longer than planned to kill the radar guidance, my bombers will be exposed during run-in. Shouldn't we have contingency options if the SCAD package can't perform? The room went silent. SCAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, was Nadia's responsibility, and Morrison had just questioned her ability to execute in front of the entire strike group. It was professional, technically legitimate, and absolutely deliberate. Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but Nadia saw his jaw tighten fractionally, a tell that meant he'd registered the challenge. The timeline includes contingencies, Nadia said before Rodriguez could respond, her voice carrying the same calm she used during carrier approaches in heavy seas. If primary suppression fails, we'll employ electronic attack to degrade their targeting long enough for the bombers to egress safely. If that fails, I'll position my aircraft between the threat and the strike element while directing a tactical abort. But it won't fail, because I've flown against S-400 simulators 40 times in the last 2 months, and I know exactly which emitters to target first, which tactics break their engagement logic, and how to exploit the 3-second gap in their tracking when they transition between guidance modes. She stood, walking to the front of the room where the threat overlay glowed like a topographic map of violence. The S-400 is a brilliant system, but it's designed to engage targets that follow predictable flight profiles. We won't be predictable. We'll use terrain masking here, she pointed to a mountain valley, to stay below their horizon until we're inside their minimum engagement range. Then we'll pop up, fire our harms at their guidance radar, and be back in the weeds before their missiles can track solution. The bombers will have exactly 4 minutes of clear sky. That's not contingency planning, Lieutenant Morrison. That's execution. The room stayed silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. This wasn't the uncertain quiet of the locker room. This was evaluation, calculation, the sound of pilots running her numbers against their own mental simulations and finding the logic sound. Rodriguez nodded once, a small movement that carried the weight of endorsement. "Any other questions?" he asked, his tone making clear that technical challenges were welcome, but doubts about capability were not. No hands rose. The brief continued through weather, communication plans, search and rescue procedures, rules of engagement. Nadia absorbed every detail, building a mental model of the mission that would guide her decisions when radios failed or plans unraveled, when the clean lines on the map dissolved into chaos, and someone had to make the call that brought everyone home or left them scattered across foreign mountains like debris. She'd led strikes before, but never one this complex, never with stakes this high, never after being reminded so brutally that some of the people relying on her judgment had spent the morning questioning whether she deserved to be here at all. The brief ended 90 minutes later. Pilots filed out toward the flight deck, their conversations blending into a low rumble of voices discussing tactics, joking about the powered eggs they'd choked down for breakfast, making the small talk that insulated them from thinking too hard about what came next. Nadia hung back, studying the map one final time, memorizing the terrain features that would matter when GPS failed or jamming degraded their navigation systems. She could feel Chen watching her from the workstation, offering silent support that couldn't be spoken without undermining the authority Nadia needed to project. "Ghost," Rodriguez's voice made her turn. He'd waited until the room cleared, creating space for a conversation that didn't need witnesses. That was well handled. "Thank you, sir." She didn't elaborate, didn't justify or explain. The best responses to command acknowledgement were brief, professional, unremarkable. "You know Morrison's going to test you up there," Rodriguez continued, moving closer to the map, his eyes tracing the same features she'd been studying. "Not overtly. He's too smart for that, but he'll push boundaries, maybe get creative with his formation position, maybe take an extra few seconds before acknowledging your instructions. He'll make you prove it where it counts, at altitude, with live weapons and real consequences." "Yes, sir, I'm aware." And she was. This morning's uniform incident was just theater, a preliminary bout before the main event. The real test would come when they were airborne, when Morrison had to choose between his ego and his safety, when following her orders meant admitting she was right. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. "I assigned you lead because you're the best tactical pilot in this squadron for this specific mission. Not because of politics, not to make a statement, but because when I look at the threat and the requirements, your name is the one that gives us the highest probability of success. That's the only calculation that matters to me." He paused, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "But I also know that being the best doesn't exempt you from having to prove it twice as hard. That's not fair, it's not right, but it is real. So go prove it, Ghost. Not for me, not for them, for yourself." He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing in the empty passageway like a countdown. Nadia stood alone in the intel center, surrounded by glowing screens that reduced war to geometry, strategy to colored lines on maps. Somewhere above her, 4 Super Hornets waited on the flight deck, their engines cold, their weapons loaded, their pilots running through mental checklists that would keep them alive when everything went wrong. In 3 hours, she'd be in the cockpit of Aircraft 401, leading those pilots into airspace where the difference between heroism and tragedy was measured in seconds and decisions, where her call sign would either become vindication or epitaph. She dimmed the screens and headed for the flight deck, climbing the ladders that connected the carrier's depths to its surface, moving through the ship's mechanical heart toward the chaos of launch operations. The ready room was empty when she passed, everyone already manning up or completing final briefs. Her locker still stood open, her helmet resting on the bench where she'd left it. The space felt different now, charged with absence, haunted by the morning's confrontation that had set everything in motion. She grabbed her helmet, checked her survival vest one final time, and headed topside. The flight deck hit her like a physical force, wind screaming across the bow at 40 knots, jet engines howling, ordnance handlers in colored jerseys moving between aircraft like pieces in a lethal ballet. Dawn was still 2 hours away, and the deck existed in artificial twilight, illuminated by floodlights that turned everything harsh and angular. Nadia's Super Hornet sat in the 6th row, its twin tails stark against the sky, weapons hanging from pylons like lethal jewelry. Her crew chief, Senior Chief Martinez, stood beside the aircraft, running final checks with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every wire, every bolt, every system carried the weight of someone's return. "She's ready, ma'am," Martinez said, not quite saluting. Flight deck protocol didn't allow for formalities that might distract from survival. Clean pre-flight, all systems green. Loaded 2 harms on stations 3 and 7, full 20 mic, and enough gas to get you there and back with reserves. He paused, his weathered face serious beneath his cranial helmet. "Heard about this morning." "Word travels fast." Nadia began her walk around, inspecting control surfaces, checking weapons mounts, performing the ritual that connected pilot to aircraft through touch and attention. "Carrier's a small town, ma'am. Small town with big consequences." Martinez followed her around the aircraft, his presence both support and witness. "For what it's worth, I've been launching birds off this deck for 22 years. Seen a lot of pilots come through. The good ones, the great ones, they all have something in common. They make the aircraft feel like it's part of them. You do that. When you fly, 401 doesn't just respond to inputs, it thinks with you. That's rare. That's special." Nadia completed her inspection and climbed the boarding ladder, settling into the cockpit that had become her second home. The tight space where speed and violence were translated into stick movements and throttle adjustments, where the abstract concepts discussed in briefings became immediate and visceral. She ran through her checklist, each switch and circuit breaker a small prayer against failure, each system check a conversation with the machine that would keep her alive. Around her, the air wing came to life. Morrison's aircraft, 403, sat 3 spots forward, his silhouette visible in the cockpit as he completed his own preparations. The other 2 pilots in the package, Torch, Williams and Slide Peterson, occupied aircraft 407 and 411, their positions carefully calculated to provide mutual support during the ingress. All 4 Super Hornets carried variations of the same deadly load. Anti-radiation missiles to kill the radars, precision bombs to destroy the infrastructure, gun rounds for whatever emerged that no one had planned for. Together, they represented about $400 million of technology and about 80 cumulative years of training. And for the next 9 hours, all of it would respond to decisions made by a woman who'd started her morning finding her commander's uniform in her locker. The radio crackled to life. "Strike package, this is boss. Green deck, prepare for launch sequence. Ghost, you're up first." The air boss's voice carried no emotion, no judgment, just the mechanical authority of someone responsible for organizing chaos into controlled sequence. Nadia ran her final checks, feeling the aircraft system stabilize around her, hearing the subtle harmonics that meant everything was aligned, ready, waiting. "Ghost, good start," she transmitted, advancing her throttles. The engine spooled up with a rising scream, turbine blades accelerating from idle to full military power in seconds. The deck crew gave her signals, tension on the catapult, hold back engaged, everyone clear. She saluted the catapult officer, a gesture that meant readiness and trust, that said she was willing to stake her life on the mechanical systems that would hurl her from 0 to 150 knots in 2 seconds. The officer dropped to one knee, touching the deck, the signal that released everything. The catapult fired. G-forces crushed her into the seat as the Super Hornet rocketed down the flight deck, the world compressing into a tunnel of force and noise before the aircraft left the ship and gravity reasserted itself. She was flying, the carrier falling away behind her as she climbed into darkness, her wingmen launching in sequence, their position lights marking their presence like stars in controlled constellation. The mission had begun, and whatever happened next would be written in the language of decisions made at supersonic speeds, where hesitation was fatal and doubt was a luxury no one could afford. "Strike package, check in," Nadia transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline burning through her system like afterburner fuel. "Ghost is up." "Viper's up," Morrison's voice professionally neutral, giving nothing away. "Torch is up. Slide is up." 4 aircraft, 4 pilots, 1 mission. They formed into their tactical spread, maintaining visual separation as they climbed through 10,000 feet, 15, 20, heading toward the initial point that would mark the beginning of their low-level ingress. Below them, the ocean was black and featureless, a void that promised nothing but cold death to anyone who miscalculated an altitude or misjudged an attitude. Above them, stars competed with a quarter moon, providing just enough illumination to make the horizon visible without revealing their presence to anyone looking up. Nadia checked her tactical display, updating the threat picture with information flowing from the carrier's intelligence systems. The S-400 site was active, its search radar sweeping the sky in predictable patterns, looking for targets that would obligingly fly straight toward it at medium altitude where missiles could reach them easily. They wouldn't be those targets. They'd use the terrain, the darkness, and timing to become ghosts in truth, present but unseen, deadly but untouchable. "Package picture clean," she transmitted. "Descending to low altitude at the IP in 3 minutes. Maintain emissions control, no radios except tactical brevity. From here out, we're silent hunters." The acknowledgement clicks came back in sequence, each pilot confirming they'd received and understood. Then silence settled over the formation, broken only by the sound of their breathing on the intercom and the subliminal vibration of engines running at reduced power. The initial point appeared on her navigation display, a geographical feature where they'd transition from high-altitude transit to low-level terrain following. Nadia descended first, trading altitude for anonymity, bringing the Super Hornet down until she was 300 feet above the water, flying by instruments and instinct, trusting the terrain-following radar to warn her if anything solid appeared ahead. The mountains rose from the coast like teeth, their peaks lost in darkness, their valleys offering narrow corridors that would shield them from radar while simultaneously threatening to trap them if anyone miscalculated a turn. "IP," she called, keying her mic once. The formation descended with her, 4 aircraft compressing their world into the narrow space between ocean and sky, racing forward at 400 knots through darkness that turned navigation into faith. Her hands worked constantly on the stick and throttles, making tiny adjustments that kept her exactly where she needed to be, not too high to be seen, not too low to become another cautionary tale in flight safety briefings. The Super Hornet responded with the precision Martinez had promised, translating her intentions into reality with the kind of seamless partnership that only came from hundreds of hours together. Time compressed. The ingress felt both endless and instantaneous, each minute stretching into hours while simultaneously evaporating like fuel from a hot gun bay. They threaded through mountain passes where snow reflected moonlight, over valleys where small towns glowed like embers, past terrain features that marked their progress toward the target. Nadia's tactical display painted the threat environment in real time. The S-400 search radar sweeping, patrol boats moving along the coast, surveillance aircraft orbiting inland. Everything was exactly where intelligence had predicted, which meant either their information was perfect or they were flying into a trap designed by someone who understood that Americans trusted data more than instinct. 10 minutes, she transmitted, her voice barely above a whisper even though no one outside the formation could hear encrypted radio calls. 10 minutes to the pop-up point, where they'd trade their invisibility for killing position, where everything they'd planned would either work perfectly or dissolve into chaos that would test every hour of training they'd ever received. Her breathing was steady, her hands relaxed on the controls, but her mind raced through contingencies, alternatives, decision trees that branched into possibilities she needed to anticipate before they emerged. Morrison's aircraft slid slightly out of position, drifting higher than the planned altitude by perhaps 50 feet. It wasn't much, barely noticeable on a clear day, meaningless in most tactical situations. But at 300 feet above hostile terrain, flying under radar coverage that could kill them if they exposed themselves too early, 50 feet might as well be 50 miles. Nadia keyed her mic once, a sharp click that meant tighten up, maintain discipline, Stay where you're supposed to be. Morrison descended back into formation after a 3-second delay that felt deliberate, testing whether she'd call him out explicitly or accept the minor rebellion. She let it pass. There would be time for correction later if they all survived. Right now, the mission mattered more than ego, outcomes more than propriety. They flew on through darkness that felt alive, predatory, waiting for mistakes. The mountains gave way to foothills, then coastal plains where radar coverage thickened and options narrowed. The S-400 site was 15 miles ahead, its position marked on her display by an icon that represented enough firepower to destroy their entire formation in seconds if they made the wrong move. Everything depended on the next 5 minutes, on decisions that would come too fast for thought, on the muscle memory developed through thousands of hours that would guide her hands when her conscious mind couldn't keep up. "Viper, split now," she transmitted. Morrison and his element broke right, positioning for their bombing run while Nadia and Torch accelerated toward the radar site. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability, the point where they had to climb out of the terrain, expose themselves to every sensor in range, and trust that their weapons would fly true before the enemy could react. Nadia pulled back on the stick, feeling the Super Hornet leap upward like a raptor striking, climbing through 1,000 feet, 2,003, until the S-400's guidance radar locked onto them with the insistent tone that meant missiles were tracking, targeting, seconds from launch. "Torch, Fox 3, she called, squeezing the trigger that sent her first HARM missile screaming toward the radar emitter at 3 times the speed of sound. The missile leapt from its rail in a flash of fire and smoke, its seeker head already locked onto the electronic signature that marked its target. 2 seconds later, Torch's missile joined hers, the two weapons racing toward the same target from different angles, giving the enemy no time to react, no space to evade. Nadia held her altitude, watching her tactical display as the missiles closed the distance, 15 miles becoming 10, 5, 0 in the span of a heartbeat. The radar signature disappeared from her screen. Either her missile had destroyed it, or the enemy had shut down to avoid the anti-radiation weapons, which was almost as good. A blind air defense system was just expensive debris waiting to happen. "Radar kill," she transmitted. "Bombers are clear, execute." But even as she spoke, her threat warning system erupted with new tones. A second radar had activated, hidden in the mountains 5 miles from the primary site, a backup the intelligence had missed or the enemy had deployed after their last satellite pass. This one was already tracking, already guiding missiles that appeared on her display as red carrots climbing toward Morrison's bombing run. Time fractured into decision points, each one demanding immediate response. She could warn Morrison and hope he reacted fast enough, could turn toward the new threat and try to suppress it, could call an abort and accept mission failure along with the lives that would continue to be lost to the radar system they'd been sent to destroy. Her hands moved before conscious thought finished forming, rolling the Super Hornet inverted and pulling toward the new threat, accepting 6GS that crushed her vision to a tunnel as she called. "New radar, North Ridge, SAM's in flight. Viper, break right, defensive." Morrison's voice came back tight with strain. "Breaking." Then the night exploded into light and violence as the first missile detonated close enough to aircraft 403 that shrapnel peppered its airframe, close enough that Morrison's aircraft vanished momentarily in the fireball before emerging on the other side, trailing smoke, system screaming warnings that painted his cockpit in red emergency light. Nadia was already firing her second HARM, guiding it toward the radar that had nearly killed her wingman, watching it track true while simultaneously calling for Peterson to take the bombing run. "Slide your primary. Target unchanged. Weather's clear, execute now." Her voice stayed level even as her aircraft shook with turbulence from Morrison's near miss, even as her threat warning system painted the sky with more missiles launching, more radars activating, the trap springing shut exactly as she'd feared. Slides in, Peterson responded, his aircraft rolling into a bombing dive while Nadia positioned herself between the threats and the formation, using her remaining harm to suppress the third radar that had just activated from another hidden position. This was what command meant in the air, putting your aircraft between danger and those you were sworn to protect, making the calculus that traded your safety for mission success, accepting that leadership sometimes meant sacrifice. Her missile found its target, the radar signature dying even as Peterson's bombs fell away in a perfect sequence, 4,000-pound weapons that would streak toward the radar complex's infrastructure, destroying the command bunkers and power generation that made the whole system functional. Nadia saw them impact on her targeting pod, saw the sequential flashes that meant successful detonation, saw the radar complex transform from a threat into history in the space of 3 seconds. "Strike complete," Peterson transmitted. "Package egress now." They turned for home, 4 aircraft that had become 3.8. Morrison's bird was flying, but its starboard engine was damaged, its fuel flowing slightly too fast from punctured tanks, its pilot managing a dozen system failures while trying to maintain formation airspeed. Nadia slid into position on his wing, close enough to see the damage by moonlight, the holes in his airframe like dark wounds, the smoke trail that marked his path across the sky. They had 100 miles of hostile airspace to cross before they'd reach the safety of the carrier's air defense umbrella. 100 miles where Morrison's damaged aircraft made them all more visible, more vulnerable, more tempting to any enemy pilot or missile operator looking for revenge. "Ghost, Viper," Morrison's voice came through her headset, steadier than she'd expected. "I'm leaking fuel faster than planned. Going to be tight making it to the boat. Might need aerial refueling or—" He didn't finish the sentence, didn't voice the possibility that he'd have to eject over water and trust the rescue helos to find him before hypothermia made the question academic. "You're making it to the boat," Nadia replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty she didn't quite feel. "Torch, move to low cover. Slide, take high. I'm staying on Viper's wing until we're back aboard." It wasn't standard tactical procedure, but standard procedure hadn't anticipated flying home with a damaged aircraft that painted them as priority targets for everyone within radar range. "Viper, reduced to best endurance speed. We'll match you. Nobody goes home alone today." They flew through darkness that felt different now, charged with the kind of focus that came after violence, when adrenaline burned through exhaustion and left behind a clarity that was almost spiritual. Morrison's aircraft flew wounded but steady, his piloting smooth despite the emergency checklist he was certainly running, the fuel calculations he was constantly updating, the decisions he was making about whether to risk controlled flight all the way to the carrier or accept ejection while he still had altitude to survive the process. Time became distance, miles falling away as they traced their route back toward the ocean, away from the mountains that had sheltered them, toward the open water where the carrier waited. Nadia monitored Morrison's fuel state through datalink, watching the numbers tick down with geometric precision, seeing his margin shrink from comfortable to tight to desperate. They were 40 miles from the ship when she made the call. "Boss, Ghost. Viper needs a tanker now. He's not making Marshall with his current fuel state." "Copy, Ghost. Tankers launching." The air boss's voice was professionally calm, revealing nothing about what he thought of a strike package returning with combat damage, about a mission that should have been clean turning into a rescue operation. "We'll have a Viking overhead at your position in 10 minutes. Can Viper hold that long?" Nadia looked across at Morrison's aircraft, reading his body language through the cockpit glass, the tension in his shoulders, the constant movement of his hands on controls, the way he kept checking his fuel gauge like watching it would somehow slow the leak. "He'll hold," she said. "He's tougher than he looks." It was the first human thing she'd said to Morrison since the morning's confrontation, and she saw him react, his helmet turning slightly toward her aircraft in acknowledgement that might have been gratitude, might have been respect, might have been the beginning of understanding. The tanker appeared on schedule, an S-3B Viking configured for aerial refueling, trailing a drogue basket that Morrison would have to connect with despite his damaged flight controls, despite his leaking fuel making his aircraft heavy on one side, despite every instinct screaming that what he needed was a landing deck under his wheels, not more time in the air. Nadia flew close formation while he maneuvered into position, making 3 attempts before his probe finally slid into the basket, locked, and began transferring fuel that might let him survive the next 20 minutes. They made it to the carrier pattern 15 minutes later, Morrison with just enough fuel to make one landing attempt, no wave-offs, no second chances. Nadia stayed on his wing through the approach, talking him down through each step though he'd done this hundreds of times, offering the steady voice that let him focus on flying rather than calculating odds of survival. His landing was firm but controlled, the damaged Super Hornet catching the 3-wire and decelerating from 150 knots to 0 in under 300 feet of deck space, the final violence of a mission that had nearly killed him. Nadia landed 2 minutes later, her aircraft undamaged but her mind replaying every decision of the last 3 hours, every choice that had led to success and near tragedy in equal measure. She shut down the engines and sat for a long moment in the silence that followed, feeling the carrier's movement beneath her, hearing the deck crew's voices outside, knowing that everything had changed and nothing had changed, that she'd proven herself again while simultaneously proving that she'd have to keep proving herself, mission after mission, forever. The debrief lasted 2 hours. Rodriguez listened to their accounts without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as they described the hidden radars, the near miss that had damaged Morrison's aircraft, the split-second decisions that had saved the mission and probably several lives. Morrison's testimony was factual, professional, absent the mockery that had characterized their previous interactions. He described Nadia's suppression tactics as textbook, her decision to stay on his wing as solid combat leadership, his voice carrying none of the usual condescension, all of the hard-earned respect that came from being saved by someone you'd underestimated. When the brief finally ended, pilots filing out toward their racks for sleep that would come hard after the adrenaline crash, Morrison lingered. He found Nadia in the passageway outside the ready room, his flight suit still smelling of smoke and hydraulic fluid, his face showing the particular exhaustion that came from nearly dying while someone else kept you alive. "Ghost," he said her call sign like he was tasting it for the first time, finding weight and meaning that hadn't been there before. About this morning, about the uniform, about everything. That was out of line. You didn't deserve that. Nadia studied him for a long moment, measuring whether this was genuine or just another performance, another tactic in the endless game of proving and testing and measuring worth. She decided it didn't matter. Sincerity or not, Morrison had flown her wing when it counted, had trusted her decisions when his life depended on it, and that was the only truth that mattered at altitude. We all have moments we're not proud of, Viper. What counts is what we do after. He nodded slowly, understanding that she was offering something between forgiveness and a challenge, a door that was open if he chose to walk through it. For what it's worth, that suppression work you did up there, the way you positioned against those missiles, I couldn't have done it better, maybe not even as well. The admission clearly cost him, each word drawn from some internal account he'd kept carefully balanced his entire career. You saved my life today. I won't forget that. I saved the mission, Nadia corrected gently. Your life was just part of the package. That's how this works. We're a team or we're nothing. She paused, then added, but you flew that damaged bird home like you owned it. That took skill and guts. We both did our jobs today. Let's keep doing them tomorrow. She walked away before he could respond, heading for her rack and the 4 hours of sleep she'd get before the next brief, the next mission, the next test of her right to exist in a world that measured her differently. Behind her, Morrison stood in the passageway, and though she didn't look back, she knew he was watching her leave, recalculating everything he'd assumed about who deserved respect and why. The next morning, Nadia's locker contained her flight suit, neatly folded and nothing else. The laughter in the ready room had a different quality now, still present, still raucous, but no longer pointed in her direction, no longer shaped like a weapon. She suited up in silence, pulled on her helmet and headed for the brief, where Rodriguez announced she'd be leading another strike package, this one deeper into contested airspace, higher stakes, more risk. Morrison was again on her wing, and when he checked in over the radio, his voice carried a new timbre, something that sounded almost like pride in being part of her formation. They flew together for the rest of the deployment, 4 months of missions that blurred together into a continuous narrative of risk and return, near misses and surgical precision, the slow accumulation of experience that transformed a squadron from a collection of individuals into something more unified, more lethal, more effective. Nadia led them all, her call sign evolving from insult to identity to legend. The ghost who flew through defenses unseen, who brought everyone home, who proved that belonging wasn't something granted but something earned through countless small actions that accumulated into undeniable truth. When they returned to port, she'd logged more combat hours than any other pilot in the air wing, and when Rodriguez submitted his recommendations for Valor Awards, her name topped the list, justified by missions that had rewritten doctrine and saved lives in measures impossible to count. The uniform incident became squadron lore, told and retold as the story of when they'd tested Ghost and learned that some spirits couldn't be banished by mockery, only acknowledged with the respect they demanded through excellence too obvious to deny. Years later, when Nadia made commander herself, she kept her old call sign, wearing it as a reminder that invisibility was a kind of power, that ghosts moved through walls, and that the spaces where you didn't belong could become home if you refused to leave and flew well enough that eventually, inevitably, they had to let you stay.